Hello and welcome back to Scottish Independence Podcasts.
This is the second of our podcasts from Brussels from the day that we spent in and around the European Parliament building.
Marking, although not celebrating, 10 years since the Brexit vote.
And this time it's a conversation that happened between Dr. Philippa Whitford, former SNP MP, Thomas Waitz. We'd met him before, didn't we? We met him last year. So what you're about to see is mainly a conversation between Thomas and Philippa.
Thomas Waitz is a really interesting character, really on the ball about politics in the UK, which very impressive, actually, especially when you compare it with our rather pathetic knowledge of what goes on in Europe. Not just an MEP, he's also an organic farmer, not just welcoming, but very open to discussions. So it's lovely to catch up with him again. He hadn't met Philippa before, but of course, she charmed him in the first 2 seconds by greeting him in German. And the two of them got on like a house on fire.
They absolutely did. It was quite a privilege to sort of just be there, watching and listening to these two really experienced politicians, really passionate about the things they believe in, and just amazingly good.
It was just so generous of Thomas to give us so much of his time. He's a busy MEP. So to spend an hour with us and to let us record it was just great.
Yeah.
We'll just mention there was somebody hoovering outside the room just for the first few seconds of the interview. But don't worry, he's finished before you know it. Later on in the conversation, you'll also hear contributions from Anthony Barnett from Open Democracy and from Andrea Pissarro and Jane McKinnon, both members of Europe for Scotland.
The most lead sectors in the UK was farming and fishing. Yeah. Apparently, in surveys, it wasn't a majority of farmers who voted for Brexit. A small majority voted to stay, but a majority of fishermen voted to stay. But it was particularly in the northeast of Scotland where we have the huge industrial fishing, and it's dominated by 5 or 6 kind of companies who hoover up all the quotas. But the west coast, where we have the islands and the fjords and the small coastal communities who actually depend on fishing more, they often can't get quota. And in the small town I live in, Troon, we had a fleet, and it was based on lobster and langoustine. And of course they were getting that live to the Paris market in less than 24 hours. And in the early months they were losing tens of thousands of pounds, because not only could they not get it there to sell, they were actually having to pay for it to be destroyed when it was all dead when it arrived. And our small fleet, we've had boats sold, we've had boats scrapped. I mean, it's much smaller than it was, and it has taken inordinate effort to even make it at all practical. And then, of course, Brexit and COVID happened at the same time, so there weren't even local restaurants that they could sell. You know, people say, oh, sell it cheaply here. Yeah, but to whom? So, you know, that actually the fishing industry has been one of the hardest hit. But on top of, as you will have experienced, organic farmers being left to cease to be organic when it takes you so long to get that accreditation. And the other group was in Scotland, seed potatoes. Scotland, seed, the ones you plant. Scotland is renowned for seed potatoes because we're
very remote areas.
We have remote areas. It's cooler, so we don't get so many of the diseases. So Scotland provides seed potatoes to many countries, and Michael Gove forgot about that as well. So it was several years before Scotland could sell seed potatoes again. So you know, the whole, even the deal that was done was completely full of holes. But the problem, even beyond the kind of economic, for us has been social. In our public sector, our healthcare, social care, our university researchers, but also many Germans and other Europeans, particularly Central Europeans, who settled in Scotland. It was the remote rural places they were attracted to, the wilderness, and those areas are struggling to maintain population. And many Europeans went home during COVID to care for elderly relatives, and particularly those maybe earning less or in social care. Because of the immigration changes, they couldn't come back. And
they didn't want to afford to come back.
Yeah, well,
it became quite costly.
It became costly, but also, why would you go where you're not welcome?
Yeah.
European nurses registering to even work in the UK fell by 85% within 3 months in 2016.
Plenty of jobs also on the mainland.
Exactly. Yeah. The loss of EU citizens is probably one of the biggest losses for Scotland.
Do you see a certain chance that through the pressure of Scotland, but also Northern Ireland, through maybe the European Union showing some willingness to debate that question, that might actually lead to UK as such trying to rejoin? Because, you know, if you make the math and you say, well, either we change direction and we admit that this was a mistake and we're correcting this altogether, or our United Kingdom might be disunited, and we're going to lose Scots and Northern Irish, or maybe even the Welsh, and they might rejoin, and we then, as England, stay alone here. Do you think could be such a momentum?
I think at the moment, the recognition that in actual fact the UK is disuniting anyway, because EU or not EU. Northern Ireland, it's clear from recent polls, even the loyalist community, the pro-UK community, the younger people want a united Ireland. I mean, it was 69%. I mean, being from Belfast, I couldn't believe that there was that change. I'm from Belfast. So the whole issues of Northern Ireland have been very acute for me. So that's a big change. The majority of people in polls in Scotland, 12 out of 19 polls, show a majority for independence. So those movements are happening anyway. So I don't know that we can say, oh, well, if the UK rejoins the EU, there'll be no independence movement. The independence referendum was before Brexit.
Yeah, I know.
But what I think is, at the moment, I'm not quite sure whether politicians in England are ready to say, it's been a mess, rejoin. What they're saying is it's a mess, let's try and patch up these little things. I'm not sure Andy Burnham will be very different from Keir Starmer on that. But what I think is, if you see in the coming years an independent Scotland in the EU, Ireland reunited, and therefore the North in the EU, what will become more obvious to England is what they've lost. Because people will be looking over the border and going, how come they've got that and that and that? And then I think you will get a change. But I think we have to get through, I think England has to get through the next general election and make sure Farage does not get power, and the consensus in England build higher. Also, even to ask the EU, who spent 6 years tied up wading through Brexit, to go through the work and effort to bring the UK back in. But I do believe that eventually the whole UK will be back in Europe for geopolitical reasons, security reasons, as well as economic reasons. But our media don't mention it. Brexit, I mean, there'll be talk about it today, but it doesn't come up. Nobody challenges Farage to say the cost of living is higher, these problems are greater because of Brexit. What do you say? No. They don't hold him accountable. So he is still projecting himself as, here's the problems we have, vote reform, I'm the answer. No, you were the problem. And so we need to see reform going back down.
None of the four parties that are somehow relevant are having a clear position on this and communicating clearly on this?
No, they're not communicating clearly on this.
I mean, okay, Labour and the Tories, but then you have Lib Dems, you have the Greens, which are performing quite well. Are they not outspoken on that?
Well, the Greens are. I mean, Zach Polanski has really been an injection of energy to the Greens in England, and that has also helped the Greens in Scotland, which is a separate party.
I know.
But he's a great performer and he's very outspoken. The Lib Dems are beginning to speak a bit more, but I mean, Ed Davey after Brexit was going, oh, well, we voted for Brexit, we have to accept it. Whereas in the SNP, we never accepted it. So I thought, you're the Lib Dems, your unique selling point is you're pro-Europe. Why are you giving it away?
Pro-Europe and pro-liberal economy and pro-economic cooperation and all of this.
I didn't understand that move because if they knew Brexit would be a disaster. So if they had stuck to their principles, they should have had the faith that actually the population will gradually come round seeing what you see. But they are now talking about it. But obviously they're third party. They're kind of a smaller party within Westminster. But I mean, Labour is, trying not to upset Brexit supporters, trying
because
to
they have both sides in
reform.
there.
But also, I mean, we'll see what it's like under Andy Burnham. I'm not sure how different it'll be, to be honest. But Labour are triangulating around reform, being more anti-immigration, being more right-wing, being more economically conservative, using austerity, all of these kind of things that was the Conservatives' approach. So, the change that was promised hasn't really come. But we'll see. I mean, Andy Burnham, if he becomes the new Prime Minister, he has a chance to say, okay, this is now my direction. But it's not clear yet just how strongly he'll put that.
I mean, his election results give some reason for hope, no?
Oh, absolutely. But in that, he didn't talk about rejoining because Makerfield is in reform country in the north. So he was very kind of limited in what he said about the EU during that election. But obviously he had a strong majority. It looks like it'll be a coronation. Wes Streeting has withdrawn. So I think he will be next Prime Minister. So he has the chance to say, come on, we all recognise this is a mess. But I'm not sure whether he's likely to do that between now and 2029. I think if they win again, then they might feel surer on that. And particularly if support for rejoining goes up a bit in England, then you might. But it's like an oil tanker. It takes time to turn around.
Yeah. And in Scotland, I mean, I've read that there's a new initiative once again to get the permission from Westminster to hold another referendum.
Well, there was a vote in Parliament. The first vote in Parliament after this election was on having another referendum, and that was supported by the majority because we have a majority of independents supporting MSPs. But the Westminster said no within 15 minutes. I mean, it's so totally disrespectful, people in Scotland, that they want to vote for independence and with a view to returning to the EU. So that's where all my energy goes. Whereas there are people who are working, do you do it this way? Do you have a de facto election? Do you have a referendum? Do you get a Section 30? Blah, blah, blah. If you're sitting there with a clear majority, as now Northern Ireland is on reunification, that is going to become harder and harder to ignore.
So you think Northern Ireland will move without permission?
They can't move without permission. And one of the problems we have is the UK government and the Irish government are meant to be honest brokers of the Good Friday Agreement. But what we've had is even a Labour Party saying, we don't support unification and we don't support a border poll. Now and the Conservatives were already saying that. That's actually quite against the Good Friday Agreement. But when you see, including the loyalist community in the north, literally over 65% supporting reunification. I mean, having grown up in Belfast, I never thought I would see those kind of numbers. So, they have a clear road back. But unfortunately, in the Good Friday Agreement, it's still the Northern Ireland Secretary has to enable the border poll. But I think if it stays at that level of support, that will become harder to ignore. What is obviously, a problem for us is you have one part of the UK that has a route to self-determination, and yet you have other parts of the UK that have no legal route to self-determination. And you'll get people say, oh yeah, but that was because of the Troubles. Is that the message you really want to send out? No, that if you're violent and have a civil war, then we give you democracy. But if you're quiet and you try to do it through democratic means, we just keep saying no?
But if there is a momentum in Northern Ireland, I mean, I think in such a political situation, how can you still deny Scotland the right to decide? I think, how would you explain that politically? I think this would start a dynamic that would lead also to an independence referendum in
absolutely. The key is actually putting the effort in speaking to the public, which is what I do. I do meetings all around Scotland, talking about independence, talking about Scotland, a European nation. The reasons to come back are obvious, but actually also Scotland brings advantages to the table. We're not Greece, despite what people try to make out. We're not poor, and we bring things that are quite important to Europe, obviously around green energy, green hydrogen, etc. But also our geopolitical position in the sort of Greenland-Norway gap. At the moment, there is very little observation of the Arctic and high north from the UK defences. But with Scotland's space industry, and I mean, Glasgow makes more satellites than anywhere outside California, and it's all Earth observation. So you suddenly can look at modern technology that allows you to protect the high north, particularly as the ice cap melts and Russia starts to use that and even China starts to use that as a trade route.
Is the fact that Iceland is reconsidering and holding a referendum this summer, is this bringing dynamics to this discussion?
I think so. I think also the EU, I mean, even Barnier is saying, well, maybe not the rebate, but things like, being outside Schengen because of the common travel area. And yes, technically signing up for the euro, but not having to rush into it. These things would be available to the UK. It's as if the EU, in trying to accept Ukraine, Moldova, but also Iceland, there's a different willingness inside the EU in the current geopolitical crisis of Trump on one side and Putin on the other, that I think the EU recognise the EU is stronger by allowing people to come together. So I think actually Iceland does contribute to that.
Yeah, because I mean, if you don't understand that we need to stand together in these times, then I think you're not a skilled politician anyhow. It's just a matter of fact. We can debate what forms of cooperation, we can debate what legal formats we find, but there's a common sense in the moment, and that interesting for me also that includes also rather right-wing parties. I would not say the extreme right, because they're not ticking along pragmatic reasoning anyhow, but like Meloni, as an example, or Polish Peace Party, both not parties I very much like or like their political program, but they have understood that this is not a question of left and right. This is a question of whether we stand in this world or we do not, or we lose. We lose our position, or we lose our economic grip. We lose our ability to co-decide where this planet goes to.
Well, as you said, the disaster of Brexit has been a warning.
Fantastic learning. Thank you for this.
to other countries. And I remember being on a visit to Berlin in September 2016, and in the group, but there was only one pro-leave in the MP delegation, but they were going, well, if you would only get rid of freedom of movement, then the UK could stay. And we were in the Auswärtige Amt, the Foreign Office, and I said, do you realise where we are? We're in East Berlin. Are you aware of Merkel's story? Freedom of movement, people in Eastern Europe, is one of the most prized possessions.
Absolutely.
And you're talking negatively about it. And they hadn't even thought about what that means, the importance of that. So you've got that kind of warning, but now you have, that America is no longer a reliable partner. You've got Trump and you've got Putin at the other end. And so what we see even looking over is, as you say, parties on the right, but not maybe the extreme, are all kind of playing down maybe the anti-EU rhetoric they might have had, 5-10 years ago, because they realise the reality that they're in.
When it comes to common defense and the ability to defend against Russia in case, yes, they're toning down their criticism. How do you see the role of European Union in all of this? Our communication, is it helpful for the cause or rather not? Well, mostly it's too quiet.
I think people will have welcomed what Barnier said about Schengen and the euro, because the polls in England that showed 55% support for rejoin, but if you then say, but we don't get any of the special measures at all, that goes down to the mid-30s. So I think we need the EU to be a bit more pragmatic, and we actually need it to be more welcoming. I mean, during our independence referendum, the majority of message from the EU, which was on the side of Cameron and the UK government, was going along that line, oh, Scotland will never get in. Well, why? We're a European nation. We have the right to apply. We have been members. We comply with the European rules for 40 years. Why would you be like that? And there were one or two voices saying that's nonsense, but only one or two voices. So I think whether it's Iceland or Eastern Europe or Scotland or the whole UK, the EU has to make sure that that pragmatic approach, that sort of being more welcoming, whereas it was often about, no, we're not going to let you in. And that was a way of intimidating Scots. The vast majority of European citizens in Scotland voted no, because they were told Scotland will be thrown out, you'll never get in, so you'll get kicked out of Scotland. Even though we were always, I mean, Nicola Sturgeon's first speech on the 24th of June was to EU citizens, please stay, you're part of our country. And yet, that was the message that had gone out. Whereas now, you know, I know because of my German husband, I know lots of Europeans, they would all vote for independence. And what you're seeing actually in Glasgow, there's now a big banking footprint like Barclays and JP Morgan and so on. Now, they don't care about politics and they don't care about sovereignty or identity. They're a big multinational. I think that investment, and it's massive, the footprint is massive, is that in their risk analysis, they see Scotland will get back in the EU before England, and if we have a base, a big headquarters in Scotland, we get passporting. We're automatically back in the EU. And so I think that's their voting with their feet, if you like.
I mean, that's very different preconditions now, because at your last referendum, it was more or less true that if you would have became independent, UK or no, England would have blocked your rejoining the European Union, most likely.
But how? Oh, you mean if we hadn't had the Brexit vote?
Exactly. Yeah, because you need unanimity. So every member state could have blocked you, and England could have blocked you rejoining the European Union. So back then, the argument was true that if you would vote for independence now, that could endanger Scotland's remaining in the European Union. But now it's exactly the opposite.
This is a very good point, that the nature of Scottish independence now is to lead the archipelago of independent countries together back into the EU, rather than it being against England. Right, and that changes the balance. I mean, the crucial thing is what will happen now in England.
I mean, I did a lot of events. My husband and I did 5,000 miles over 5,000 miles in 2014, and one woman in one meeting mentioned England and the English. It was anti-Westminster. But it wasn't Scotland being anti-England.
I'm talking about what will be happening now
in the EU,
in England, with a new Prime Minister.
What are you expecting?
Well, it's very interesting. I was in Makerfield for the by-election and supported trying to stop the fascists. And this is there is a far right. They were very well mobilised. And on the streets, I didn't expect the vote to be so positive. The area we were canvassing in Remain areas. I mean, in the sort of Farage, and what was striking was that people were talking, when I went, people were saying this is an old mining community, so I was expecting decline, but in fact it's 97% white, which is very exceptional in England, and there were owner-occupied houses, so it was old modern council estates which have been privatised, 2 cars for each house, and reform banners everywhere. And I met some Restore are for basically they're almost Nazi, therefore expelling 3 to 5 million people. But their vote went up very slightly. I mean, they're still 1/3 of the population. And what was striking about Andy Burnham's campaign was it was entirely about him. There was no mention of the Labour Party on the leaflets. So it was vote Andy at 10 p.m. Right? And it was Andy for hope. That was it. Right? And I saw one banner saying vote Labour, and it was you were a bit shocked. So, but this means that the Labour got 73% in 1997. It was a massive Labour constituency. So there's quite a traumatic loss of confidence thanks to Starmer and to Brexit, to the Labour government. And what Burnham is doing, there are two things. One, he wants very strong regional devolution in England, and because of the Manchester experience, that is quite powerful, and it's a new argument. It's not Labour was always a party, I think,
of centralisation.
But he's not yet come round to the English. There's still a deep resistance to an English Parliament and to an English voice. And while there isn't an English Parliament, the right, they have two things. They fly both the Cross of St. George, the English flag, and the Union Jack. And if they fly the Union Jack as well, the English flag becomes white. Represent, the Union Jack is everybody, and the England is ours, is white. But if there's an English Parliament, if we can move towards an English democracy, it will cease to be racially defined. And this argument is beginning, for the first time, to gain traction. So I think that, and it's clearly associated with becoming a European country. And your point is a very important one about America, because in his acceptance speech at 3 o'clock in the morning on Friday, Burnham said, we want a politics of unity, unlike the politics of the United States. And usually English politicians look to American democracy as somehow a model for us, part of it. And so right at that moment, to bring down, to see that we do not wish to be like America, implies a different politics. So there is a deeper momentum. I don't want to exaggerate, but there is a deeper momentum of becoming a European country, which I think people can feel. And this is, I think, different from let's reverse Brexit, which is a sentimental attempt to go back to how it was, which is not available. Even with what Barnier said, you can get the special conditions, but still psychologically, a lot of that is about trying to go back to the past. But there's a new sense of Europe is our home. And I think up till now, all the arguments, especially the official arguments for being part of the EU on the part of the English, were transactional. So when Cameron made his speech saying there would be a referendum, he said, I don't feel European, I'm not really European, but we must make money, it's important for us to be part of the European Union. So there was,
That's not exactly how you convince people.
You could see that was loose, the passion was drained away.
That's why I was saying to Thomas before you arrived, that they reran Project Fear that they had used in Scottish referendum. And I did talk to Conservatives about it was all the sky will fall if you vote to leave, instead of all economic, but nothing talking about what we had gained by being in Europe. And I think what is different now, because you are talking about going to Europe,
there's a question of identity.
But culture and social, which are very, because Scotland sees itself as European and has done for centuries, that was a much bigger part of our debate. And as you say, not going back, but going forward, that becomes a much more obvious thing to talk about the social benefits, the cultural benefits, the benefits to the younger generation, the environmental, all of the things, not just economy.
But also about belonging, because the plan B was a special relationship with the US, and that definitely didn't fly.
No.
It sank. Somewhere in the Atlantic, that idea was drowned into the sea. I mean,
you can belong to something that you don't like very much, that you're angry with, that you feel is
like your family.
Yeah, right? And so that belonging is not about gain, it's not in the transactional framework.
Yeah.
And that is very big. That this is a shift in Scotland. It is the settled will of the Scottish people. I'm sure, right, is to be European.
Yeah. And let's not forget Wales. And that was the big news of this year.
That's the big change.
Labour for a century in a continuous fashion. It's the longest continuous administrative polity in the world. And this time they voted the Plaid Cymru. And it was interesting that in this series of anti-fascist votes across Britain, Wales came first in a by-election in which Plaid Cymru defeated the Farage, when still Farage was a little more popular than it is now, because Restore, the split was still early stages. And so I think Anthony is right when he says we are moving forward to a new psychological condition across the UK nations, in which people see new vehicle for expressing their identity in an emancipatory way. And despite us being Europe for Scotland, we are also very much Europe for Wales, Europe for England, Europe for affirming these nationhoods that are old but also modern, and they can be good, particularly, and in this case I speak as a European. The next chapter, what we need to be doing and getting right together is the enlargement. And how do we do the enlargement? And we need to be inclusive. And if you talk about what kind of voices we want to hear from the EU, we need to see welcome signs, colorful welcome signs that show that the Europeans are getting together at this moment in the world to do something which is democratic, principled, and open. And therefore, looking eastwards, absolutely, Ukraine welcome, Albania welcome, Balkans welcome, British nations welcome, this kind of approach.
Yeah. And you don't see enough of that?
No, on the British side, no. I see a lot of UK welcome, which is okay, but also add something about the fact that you see that there are all the peoples of the UK, the nations of the UK, express this sentiment. It's very important to remember that there is more than 60% in all 4 nations of the UK that want to rejoin the EU. So it's not anymore something. Scotland is still ahead. It's 70%, always ahead of Scotland.
And Northern Ireland now as well. But almost the most important one is Wales, because they did vote Brexit, but now they're 65% for rejoin. I mean, England is lower than that, but as we said earlier, it's a majority, it's 55%. And that'll come up if we had this almost positive, forward-looking discussion that you're talking about. You would get, particularly among younger people, because they're the ones who've lost most. We're not looking to move to Europe, to travel, to study, because we're old fogies. But our young people, what we had in our generation, we've taken away from the next generation.
Sure.
So, I think the more Europe is reaching out to be welcoming, which is not how it looks from either Scotland or the UK, and also particularly engaging with young people. And I think that's why improving the youth mobility, the cultural mobility, the creatives,
which we did.
But that, particularly creative people, it's a disaster. Bands, orchestras, ballet companies, musicians. It's a nightmare trying to tour in Europe. So allowing those sort of cultural and social connections even first, they carry a message back and they carry a message into Europe.
Yes, that reinforce that the framing of Europe's message is belonging, not let's get back to business. Right? Because once you're into the business side, then the right say we have got the right deals, and we make a deal with India, and you get into that sort of how do you make more money, and that's the framework. That's the old imperial framework. And I think if you say, for good or ill, we want you. We are part of a single family with all the arguments in every family, which we're all familiar with. that framing is very important. And the shift of that, if that shift can be made, that would be very helpful.
And getting it out. You have to get through the wall of the British media. As we know, people say, why didn't you tell people that? You're going, we've been putting that out, day after day, but it doesn't appear in broadcast or whatever. So it's actually getting members of this parliament or other European groups. You need to be getting into media. You need to be using online, social media, whatever, to be getting your message out, because that isn't always getting through to people.
Yeah, I mean, that European Union is not all too outspoken when it comes to Northern Ireland and Scotland is also due to the security situation and due to the pure fact that there's quite a sensibility in the moment not to provoke or to spark any difficult discussions into England, actually, because we need to cooperate very much. But I even see a shift in main media. I sometimes watch this from the Sun guy, this battlefield something on Ukraine, because he does quite interesting analysis sometimes, and I mean, this is the Sun. And if you listen to the guy, he regularly gives statements between the lines. You need to listen a bit between the lines, like emphasizing the need for more cooperation with the Europeans on the mainland, for actually praising that there's common good we need to defend together, kind of portraying Russia as our European enemy and not just British or English. So I see a certain shift also in mainstream media. I don't know how far that goes, but I just realized it.
I think like what I was saying, I mean, what got us to Brexit was 40 years of British politicians blaming Europe for everything. I'd fix it, but Europe won't let me. But equally, Europe didn't counter. Europe didn't have a system of saying, look at this great thing. Okay, your politicians are moaning about it, but it's improving your beaches, your air, your health and safety, your access to new medicines, whatever it is. And I think that kind of thing is there. When we were going through the Withdrawal Act, Westminster was claiming that Europe had played no part in the Good Friday Agreement. Whereas actually it was John Major and Alfred Reynolds being in a neutral space that even allowed them to reach out to each other. And the peace funding was massive. And yet we had MPs on the Conservative benches standing up saying Europe has no voice in this, they have no relevance to it. And the Northern Ireland MPs at the time, up to 17, were saying that's nonsense. I was part of the Good Friday Agreement, and they were a really important central player.
Moderators and finances. Financiers.
But Europe didn't talk about it. So most people, probably even in Northern Ireland, wouldn't know the role that the EU played. So I think as well as that, it's kind of the EU being a little bit more positive about your own PR. This is what we can deliver. This is what we offer. And you're welcome to join us.
Yeah, we're not very good in this, because it would sometimes contradict the messaging of the governments. Because we have this systematic everywhere. I mean, it's pretty easy, to blame Brussels for whatever doesn't work in your country. And if there's positive things coming from the from our common policy environment, then ministers are very invited to claim that this is me and my government, and we delivered this to the citizens. We have this all around the European Union. Canada, is this playing a role for you? You know that Canada has, two things they did. First, they were just theoretically asking the Commission whether it would somehow be imaginable that Canada joins the European Union. But this was just for a few days. But then the actual talks are going in the direction of including Canada into the European markets. Into the common market.
Right, okay.
Single market, no, not a debate.
I think this is very positive, but I would just emphasize all the argument about practicality. It's underneath this. There is the sense of this is our home, which is different from you will benefit. Look at what is happening with our beaches. All that. I agree with all that, but the point is that it's that shift is what we need to get across in England.
But I'm on the same page.
But I think Canada would undermine that.
would undermine it.
Yes, because you can't say in England, Scotland, Wales, Canada is our home. It then goes back to being the EU is just a gigantic trade agreement.
No, I don't think that's true.
Whereas Greenland coming in
I don't think
would be.
I also have a different perception, because what is...
We are a European nation, and it's Europe.
If we talk about identity and belonging, what is the alternative for UK to Europe? It's the Commonwealth. It's the past. It's the, you know, it's where the Queen or the King is still king. Yeah, I mean that's your plan. I don't know, B or C. So you have US, you have Commonwealth, and you have the European Union. I mean, US, okay, it's off the table. Yeah. No more need to discuss that. Commonwealth is crumbling.
I don't think the Commonwealth doesn't really.
No.
But I think the question of belonging is much. You know, people didn't really think Ukraine was part of Europe.
Yeah.
Right. But now everybody feels that it now belongs to us.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, Ukraine is a very long way away.
Oh,
I mean,
for you people, yes. For me, no.
Ukraine is further away from England
psychologically,
than Canada.
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
And I suppose,
but it's the sense that this is our home, and the sense that we would, you know, there's something European about Canada. It represents a cultural alternative to American politics. And this is not transactional. I'm for all the transactional arguments, obviously, and for all freedom of movement and beaches and regulation and that. But there is something additional, that if we must shift the argument away from simply an argument about
I suppose with Canada being so dominated by French, Scots and Irish who cling to their culture and learn Irish dancing and bagpipes to a greater extent than we do, you could make very much the cultural argument that Canada sees itself as, if you like, the new Europe, the Nova Scotia, etc., which America doesn't feel, even though it has massive European
And I think there's a momentum in this. There's a momentum in this because who is leading the free world? Who is doing that? US is not doing it anymore. This spot is...
Or leading it in the wrong direction.
Exactly. So and who could do it? It can only be Europe. And the European Union, or the like-minded ones, whether we are all full members in the European Union or we are closely linked through common market or common defense or common, you know, there's different options. I prefer full membership, so we can all sit on the same table and decide together, but that's not the only option we have.
But that's also a challenge to the EU itself, in that often in recent years, in some of these crises, the EU has still just seen itself very much as an economic, you know, single market, customs union, a few other bits. Whereas, you know, the big challenge is, okay, it changed regarding Ukraine, but their failure with regards to the Middle East, you know, their failure around things like Trump and so on, to see themselves as, we are one of the big power blocks in the world, we need to step up. So I think, yes, security and so on because of Ukraine, but actually Europe has quite a long way to go to see itself as one of the big power block players in the world, and the responsibility that goes along with that to take action, including, you know, cutting trade or laying down different rules. They've often kind of, oh no, that's not really for us to get involved in. And so that has almost allowed people to criticize the EU over the last couple of years, particularly about, you know, Gaza, Lebanon, etc., where they've kind of been mealy-mouthed and not taking action as a kind of world power, and they haven't seen themselves as that.
I think this is a very good point, because I think if you look at the security situation we are in, and I completely agree that security is very important in this moment, a security threat that is obvious to everyone is the US administration. So the actions imperil our borders, imperil our trade, imperil our livelihood, what they did in Iran, what they are doing in Ukraine, which, you know, they're not supporting it anymore. There is even, you know, a few occasions in which we learned that the US security service were informing not the Ukrainians, but sometimes the Russians. So, you know, it's a situation in which we need to disentangle our security from the US. In that sense, the Canadians are very, I mean, absolutely, we should talk to the Canadians very seriously about what's going on. Because we cannot trust the US in this political direction to remain something we can share information with. And this is a crucial point. And on Scotland, just want to say, they got it right on all the foreign policy issue of this time. No, they stood by Ukraine and they stood by the legality of what should happen, human rights in Palestine, in a way that unfortunately Westminster completely failed. And we need to say that.
I think this is a very interesting question, but I don't myself, I'm not comfortable with the EU trying to become another power bloc. I think that it stands for regulation and international law, and it is attacked by the United States, by the Trump administration and by Putin, precisely because it stands for a regulated world, it stands for human rights, it stands for certain universal legal standards.
But that's what I mean by leading the free world.
Whereas the United States wants a gangster international, right?
Exactly.
So I think that's very important, but I don't think we want to become a gangster as well.
I didn't mean that.
So
Me neither.
Fine, but I mean, I think this is really...
You see, I don't think the EU stood for international law. The Genocide Convention calls on you to prevent genocide. International.
I take the point.
So that's where they should have stepped up.
Yes,
is around international. I don't mean in the gangster sense.
Not in the style of have to be a great power, but in the sense that if we are going to be true to European values, then of course we must oppose the genocide. The policy towards the Middle East has been very provoking and two-edged.
It's been pathetic.
And that's pathetic.
But that's what I mean. I didn't mean to be a new Trump. I don't see Ursula von der Leyen as a new Trump. But the EU itself, that's what I meant about a world power that stands up for human rights, and they have not stood up.
Yeah, for democratic values.
2.5 years, they have not stood up for human rights, and that's the failure.
Used to be, we want to be a beacon.
Yeah.
Didn't always meet that. It was aspirational. But it wanted to be a beacon. So perhaps for Europe to project more forthrightly, more confidently, and with more conviction, how it might project those values, its own values, and assume them more, not merely as replacing an American alternative, but really assuming a new articulation of what this new Europe might be.
But then also taking action. The problem is lots of rhetoric and articulation, when you don't follow through, also looks bad. And that's been part of the problem. I mean, even in the 9 years I was active in Westminster, we were campaigning for recognition of Palestine. And we achieved recognition of Palestine last year. But it didn't mean anything. It was a fig leaf. Nothing came from it. So you have to actually decide, what does international law say? What is all the things that were laid down in 1948 after the disaster of the Second World War? You need to stand by that. So the most ironic bit in Starmer's speech was, I have stood by international law. Well, actually, right from the start, no, you didn't. So Europe needs to talk about that, but it needs to then follow through. And that's more what I meant, that it needs to be that beacon, as you say, for international law, for the rule of law, and also for human rights. But that has to be, as you were saying, Anthony, universal. And that's what it's not been at all. Even if you look at the framing in our media.
Beacon also means being welcoming. So the question of migration, I mean, in a governed way, but it also means being welcoming to the world.
We're not that good.
But also recognizing
this in the moment.
But also recognizing how many refugees are created by us, whether it's we sell weapons or we promote instability or we let our country be destroyed by climate change, and then we moan because people are seeking safety. So, you have to look at that bigger picture. And if you're looking at both America and Russia being completely untrustworthy, and China is waiting in the wings, they're the ones paying attention to the global south, not us.
Exactly.
Europe has a really big role to play, but it has to actually step up.
I have to move on, colleagues. You know where to find me if it's about collecting signatures or writing interesting letters or giving public statements or finding another 3 colleagues from different parties to give a public statement. You know where my office is. You know that I'm a supporter, and please approach me when I can be of help.
Yeah, thank you so much for your time.
Keep up the motivation. Please keep up the motivation.
Thank you.
Lovely to meet you.
So I hope you found that as fascinating a discussion as we did. If you haven't seen our first video from Brussels, it's on our YouTube channel. I'll put the link in the notes if you want to go and watch. And that's the sort of the day and how it unfolded and what we got up to, hanging around coffee shops and things.
Hanging around coffee, I bet. Hang on, I put a motion forward, to accept Scotland back into the EU. I mean, that was easy. It was passed unanimously.
It was passed unanimously by 2-0. But, that's 100%. And then if you're enjoying our Europe coverage, we've still got one more to come, which will be clips that we want to talk about from the evening event, which was a panel discussion. Now, it is out on live stream already. If you want to watch the full nearly 2-hour version, you can do so. But if you just want to hear what bits me and Marlene thought were the most interesting or the most controversial, one of them actually, then join us. Probably next week, possibly the week after, just depends how the scheduling goes. Bye for now.
Bye for now.
Thanks for listening, everybody. Hope you enjoyed that. Don't forget to subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts. And if you're listening on YouTube, you can click the little bell and you get a reminder whenever we put out a new episode, which is every Friday.
And sign up for our mailing list. You can do that from the website. And we always send one out at the beginning of each month to tell you what's happening. Last but not least, you can buy us a coffee on coffee.com.
And we'll catch you later. Bye now.